Previously on Digital Hauntology.
If you're excited about the next Taro game, then welcome to the club and I'm happy to have you, but maybe this isn't his best. Let's just hope we don't have to wait too long until Square Enix gets with the program.
I uploaded that video at the end of January. I found Voice of Cards to be a serviceable but ultimately uninspired title, and this was concerning for me considering that Yoko Taro was at the helm as the creative director. If you've seen my previous video on Voice of Cards, then you will understand that I am a huge Yoko Taro fan. And if you haven't seen it, yeah, it's still true. When I wrote those words, I had no idea that I was literally 1 week from Square Enix announcing a follow-up, and only 3 weeks away from actually being able to play a new Taro game. We certainly live in strange times. I didn't know what to make of this. Taro had recently declared the Nier series dead, but then Square Enix announced a Nier anime series, and then now Taro is suddenly 2 games deep into a series over the course of 4 months. It was such a strange and unprecedented move that regardless of my feelings of the first game, I just had to play this stealth sequel. And what I found was a game that, while certainly a slow burn, ultimately flipped every expectation I held on its head and somehow made me very excited for what now has the potential to become one of my favorite new franchises. I don't quite understand this either. On its surface, this second game, Voice of Cards, The Forsaken Maiden, doesn't do much to stand out from its predecessor, and my initial impressions were actually far less enthusiastic this time around. This title's aesthetic is very firmly placed in the first games, almost to the point where there are so many shared assets that I had to wonder if Alamco, the development studio, have built out some sort of RPG Maker toolset before starting this series. The Game Master is back, our narrator, an aspect of the first game that I offered praise without any concession, but this time around, something's just a bit off. Todd Habercorn, the narrator from the first game, has been replaced with newcomer Mark Atherley.
You stand before the Spirit Spire, said to have been erected to protect the island.
Atherley doesn't do a bad job, per se, but when compared to his contemporary, it is a noticeable downgrade. And one look at his IMDb shows us that he hasn't been nearly as busy as our King Todd.
No! God, please, no!
Whether it was a directorial choice or something Atherley decided on his own, our narrator now has a much more youthful and energetic approach to the line reading, even making the choice to stumble over some of the lines in an attempt to denote some sort of amateurishness with this new role.
Her voice is husky, almost as if it had been... Her voice is husky.
This particular choice is a real double-edged sword, as it is kind of cute when it happens when you're out on the field exploring, but when it happens while the plot is becoming decidedly more high stakes, not so much. In some ways, it's just bad. With the Game Master being responsible for setting the tone of the story and some cheeky early events cementing this tone, Forsaken Maiden starts off with much lower stakes than the early events of the first game.
You have arrived near the entrance of the village.
It's Pikachu!
There is a real lazy, or maybe a better word for it is cozy, mood presented in the beginning of Forsaken Maiden. Our new protagonist is decidedly more vanilla than an Isle Dragon, if that's even possible, and our first ally, Laddie, is a mute that does very little in terms of interaction or development in these early hours. The early settings are sparse, the music tame, and the artwork for characters and monsters has some real B-team energy early on. And then we meet our third character, Lack.
This one I have no idea what this one is. I didn't ask for this.
My initial reaction to this character's design was just confusion. But after meeting this abomination, which even the narrator continues to refer to as it, even long after the character had gone through extreme lengths to endure themselves to the cast, and myself to be honest, the main quest is made apparent. Our mute ally, Laddie, is tasked with ascending to the role of maiden in our starter town. But something is off about her, so she needs to venture off to the neighboring islands in order to get help from 4 other maidens, or more specifically, their relics, in order to complete this transformation. When you first get out to sea, it started to dawn on me that this game has a much larger scale than the first. Where the first game had 2 continents and a few side dungeons, this game has 4, albeit smaller, islands, but each of them has their own story and side activities. Venturing around the map and getting into random events like the first game is where Forsaken Maiden's more laid-back mood started to resonate with me. I've always loved RPGs and stories where you are world hopping, and with Final Fantasy X being one of my favorite all-time RPGs, this game's nautical vibes really started catching me off guard and reminding me of something that I grew up on. This exploration phase also serves to do something else that I truly adore in RPGs, and that is allow you to explore out of your depth, and in this game it's literal, and come across some difficult fights early on. There's some pretty heavy-handed progression gating, but you can still do some fun side quests in this phase and get yourself into trouble. There was one design choice that was irking me in this early chapter, and that was the fact that only our generic main character has the ability to equip different weapons.
What? I'm tripping. It looks so equipable.
Laddie and the MC can both change armor and accessories, but then Lack, he can't equip anything at all, which I guess makes sense considering he's the size of a chihuahua, but early on, the game seemed to be missing so much extra depth in its selection of abilities and way to augment your characters. I should stop here for a second to say all of this is a recurring theme. The early hours of this game befuddle and drag, and there's a little hope here and there, but in a lot of ways, this game just felt inferior to the first. But over the course of almost 40 hours, this game is exponentially longer and deeper than the first. Every little complaint I had, including the ones that I've outlined so far into this video, were all remedied, addressed, or they're in order for the player's expectations to be subverted. This is one of those keep playing till it gets good situations, and while I don't really endorse that kind of thing, it worked here, for real. Going to the first available island introduces us to our first pair of maiden and attendant. Think Final Fantasy X's summoner and guardian relationship. This is going to be another recurring theme, me comparing this game to Final Fantasy X. In a few key ways, this game really does have a lot in common with it, and for me, that really just is a good thing. Upon meeting our new duo, Philia and Hyde, we are given slightly more dynamic characters, and more importantly, we are presented with this game's first deviation from the first. When you're on the island, completing a Maiden's Tale, your party goes from the established 3 from the first game to 4. And you are also introduced to link skills. At first they are a bit on the underwhelming side, but eventually those evolve into cornerstones of deep strategy and customization. And with having 4 party members, the game allows for more difficult encounters as you have more resources and more abilities. Every character except for Laddie and the protagonist are locked into their abilities and equipment, so whenever you're on one of these excursions, you have to work within these parameters to build a team that complements the rigidity inherent to these guest characters. It's good stuff, and as the game progresses, wrinkles on this concept make for interesting choices. The writing also takes a huge leap forward during these chapters, with our main cast being a vanilla adventurer, a mute on a mission, and a puppet thing. These side characters become the driving force of the drama for a good chunk of the game. Billy and Hyde offer to help you with your journey if you help them on their own. Some of these stories have some spectacular writing, and the twists cut with Taro's expert bleakness. I won't go spoiling too much, but being a maiden is not an easy life, and it makes these characters responsible for quite a lot in order to keep their respective villages safe. Every new island is an exciting place to explore. New events pop up on the map, towns have their own unique flavor and music, and the sense of exploration and scope of the game's conflict starts to escalate as you aid Laddie in her journey. The Azure Maiden's story is a heartbreaking love story. The Crimson Maiden's tale is a coming-of-age tale and an excuse to be introduced into this game's arena area. The Ivory Maiden's tale is a mysterious journey into a pristine town with dark secrets and some really fascist overtones. And the Onyx Maiden's tale is one of loss and sacrifice that places some interesting connections to the first game. Some of these moments and themes are great, with the Northern Isle and the Eastern one having some of my personal favorite moments. All these offer a chance for Laddie to experience character development and be aided in her own quest. Her journey in particular escalating into some dark and really visually interesting territory. Her main quest is introspective and really about coming into her own, which in no small way makes it so that Laddie is revealed over time to be the true main character of this story. This is a game that as you peel away at it, more and more reveals itself. The storytelling just keeps getting more interesting and sentimental, the music continues to evolve as the stakes raise, and some of these songs are amazing. This is Keiichi Okabe from the majority of Taro's other games, but he really outdid himself on some of these tracks, and a few of them have been stuck with me ever since playing this game. The structure of the overall game is a streamlined version of things that Taro has messed with in the past. but I think that this is one of the better implementations that he's attempted. There are little threads in this game that the perceptive can pick up on, some of which tie to the first title in some really interesting ways, and also they go so far to recontextualize certain aspects to where they just hit differently now. And then even the ending is bittersweet and well executed. There are some slight stumbles here and there. Some reveals don't quite land the way that I think they were expected to. There are some ham-fisted attempts to have things come across as more important or more emotionally resonant than they have any right to be. And in two distinct cases, there are some pretty thin explanations for some big plot points. I think the biggest failure of this game is actually the card game coming back from the first. It's probably this game's cardinal sin. This side activity was, and still remains, RNG heavy trash that really doesn't offer any more strategy than that grade school card game War. A game of war that seems predetermined to either fuck you over mercilessly or allow you to win without any real contest. I hate these games, I hate all the rules, I detest how slow it is, and I cannot imagine the cretins who interface with this in a multiplayer setting. If you play this game in multiplayer mode, please get help. There are people who love you and you are hurting yourself. It's unacceptable behavior. I'm sorry for the rant, but something needed to be said. But with this game's ability to subvert, maybe a follow-up will figure out a way to have this card game matter in a way that I cannot imagine. Seems to be an almost impossible task, but that's where this game's magic really seems to be. Forsaken Maiden had it so that I was always constantly looking forward to the next wrinkle, to the next evolution of the game's art style, to the game's ability to redefine itself constantly, and its expert ability to take even some of the most rigid systems and give them context and weight in a way that I was truly impressed by. Where the gameplay of the first game was a little bit of a slog, we now have the ability to turn on a fast mode during exploration and grinding. This was added as a feature post-release in the first game, but I had already completed it before the update was made available. And most importantly, the combat and strategy and party composition is really light years ahead of where they were before. In the first game, it really didn't take much experimentation to find the perfect party that offered a one-size-fits-all approach to fights. Use Melanie as a battery to build up resources, and Riddist and the protagonist's abilities to heal, buff, or inflict damage. After a little experimentation, your party becomes virtually unkillable with no real change in strategy required, no matter how late game the enemy that you are fighting is. And after a while, the rest of the characters went unused, and I had to keep running back and forth from town to sell off items because they kept hitting their cap because I had no use for them in combat. In this game, however, everything feels like it requires a trade-off. For every overpowered skill, there is a concession required for building up resources. You want to be prepared for status effects and debuffs? Well, you're going to have to get up one of those attacks. You want extra gemstones at the beginning of a fight? Well, guess what? That accessory that increased your critical chance, it needs to go away so that you can have it. Party composition became so granular that I was manipulating equipment based on speed stat, deliberately raising and lowering the stat so that I can have party members attack in the preferred order, just to find myself in a new chapter where things had to be changed again because the cast had changed. At this point, I'm going to spoil some in-game content, late-game content, until the timestamp. It has very little bearing on the plot, and it doesn't really mean much without context, but you've been warned, and so watch at your own discretion. All of these party composition choices and strategy choices were great, and they all came to a head with not only a terrific final boss, but a behemoth of a multi-phase super boss that seemed designed to test any conceivable build. I'm sure that someone smarter than me will come up with a more elegant solution for how to handle this fight, but I'm not sure that I would even want to know about it. I wouldn't want to be robbed of the 45-minute damage mitigation test that I was subjected to. Every turn had drama to it, every choice required an action that meant giving up another one that could be equally important. I loved this fight. I haven't felt this way about an RPG super boss in a long time, maybe not since Final Fantasy X's Penance, but I found this one to be even more interesting than that, as Penance is mostly beat in the menus with your party composition and only requires situational awareness to come out on top. I really can't overstate how important the combat in this game was, and with it juxtaposed against the combat in the first game, and then to take that logic one step forward and zoom out to see how much everything in this game has evolved, I really can't reconcile how impressed I am with how well this was done. To have a game borrow so much from its predecessor, and arguably be so much cheaper and quick to make from recontextualizing the work that was done in the original. Taro and team seem to have been able to take the building blocks from Isle Dragon and make something so much greater than the sum of its parts. This isn't perfect, there are things that I would like to see changed, there are some silly moments, some dumb choices, but what they got right is so important that I can't overstate this. The credits of this game leave you on a see you soon kind of message, and hopefully they get around to making another one, or the series doesn't get canceled before they're able to, because I truly can't wait. So here's hoping for a third chapter, and let's hope that the wait is somehow even shorter than the wait between these two. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you for watching. I certainly didn't expect to make this video. I don't think anyone expected there to be a sequel so quickly. But if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. I'm still new to this, so any feedback would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again.